Greetings, YouTube. Today I'd like to talk about gaming-related humor, both tabletop role-playing games and video games. Now, anyone who remembers the era back when gaming magazines were actually magazines, printed on paper and you could buy them in stores, will remember that there were always comics in every issue. In fact, there were humorous comics in the original Dungeon Master's Guide for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, and I still have fond memories of them all, seeing as I probably read those comics 1,000 times. And I actually own gaming-related humor in print. This is called Fantastic Fantasy Cartoons, compiled by James B. King. And it's not direct gaming humor, but it plays up on a lot of the classic fantasy tropes that were alive and well in what would be considered the old school era. But I also have some comics that I read online, which are still in publication, which are gaming related. Now, some of these only have a few gaming related storylines, and some of them are dedicated to games completely. Now, the first I'm going to put up here is called Something Positive. This is a story of a number of characters that live in both the Boston area and in Texas, and their weird, wacky lives. Now, it doesn't have a lot of gaming content, but the main character, Davin, does run a game occasionally, and they've actually done in-game storylines where the comic itself is all about the characters that the people sitting at the table are playing. I quite enjoy the comic. I read it every day. I thought, every time he posts, which is like 2 or 3 times a week, I think. Though for a while he did it a daily comic for an entire year because people donated enough money, which I thought was kind of cool. The next is Atland, and Atland posts once a week on a Thursday. Well, sometimes once a week, sometimes it's every 2 to 3 weeks. But the art style is quite pleasant, though he does do the whole bikini babes armor style thing. But the storylines are definitely classic high fantasy tropes. It's a fantasy world full of mages and swordsmen and things like that. And I really have enjoyed reading this comic over time. He's up to like 325 entries, so there's a lot of here to read if you're so inclined, and I quite enjoyed them. Then there's Extra Life, which talks about mostly video games, but occasionally he touches on the tropes of tabletop role-playing games. And at one time he did, and a number of other people did, a really great podcast. They no longer produce the podcast, sadly. I loved the Extra Life podcast. I believe it is still available on iTunes if you ever want to go listen to it. I've really and thoroughly enjoyed that podcast. Very funny stuff. Next we have Frontal Nerdity, which takes place around a table, and it's the gamers experiencing the game that their eternal GM is running, though they vary from system to system, and a lot of the times they're talking about real games, sometimes they're talking about games they've made themselves, and it's very much the classic guy sitting around a table and gaming with each other. I quite enjoy it. I check it out every week. I believe it's only changed once a week. I'm not positive. Next we have VG Cats, which deals with video games, the VG and VG Cats. And it's updated irregularly, but some of the humor is very funny. I really enjoy what they do, and they make a lot of lampoons at the gaming companies themselves. Like Sony is a favorite target of the humor of this comic, which is deserved because Sony does some strange and bizarre things. But the last one we have here is called Commissioned, and this is produced by a guy named Obsidian, also goes by the name of O, and he was part of the Extra Life podcast for quite a while, and he is a Colombian guy, and he's very interesting. His English is flawless. His English is better than mine is. And he is an artist in the truest sense. He teaches art at a college. He's done gaming illustrations, but O is an interesting person just in general. He's done art shoes. He does kung fu. He does cosplay. He is into tattoos and general body art. He's a fascinating character, and he has done a number of podcasts over the years as associated with Extra Life, which are also quite entertaining if you can hunt them down. I'm not sure if they're still linked to on his page or not. But he is a very ribald and interesting take on life. Little scatological humor and such. I quite find him entertaining. But he does a lot of storylines that are based completely in character. He's talking about he's showing the story that his players are playing in the game, and then he also does the comics of the people sitting at a table that are playing these characters. And some of these things are based on real life storylines that he and his buddies have done over the years, because he is a player of Dungeons and Dragons. And some are things he's just created purely for the comic. And then he also does adventures, which storylines which are about the wacky things that he and his friends get involved with in real life, which are, of course, taken to extremes, and he embellishes them. But many of these storylines are based on things that he himself has experienced. For example, the love-hate relationship he has with his Jeep, which is quite humorous, and his love of cats. In fact, when one of his cats passed away, his tribute to the cat was frankly very moving. But these are the comics that I read on either a daily or a weekly basis that have, at least tangentially, a role-playing theme to them. And in the case of Extra Life and Full Frontal Nerdity and Commissioned, they are full-blown role-playing themed storylines in them. So I thought that people might find this interesting. And I'm looking for other online sources of humor that people read on a regular basis, because I'm always looking for new comics to read and things like that. So I'd like to hear what you have to say. What is your favorite online role-playing humor? Also, do any of you out there remember the cartoons from the first edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons books, or am I just showing my age?